Okay, so today we're going to look at Valerius. I've included some images, but if you want to go and search for some online, just type in Valerius, painter. He's Dutch and he was around a couple of hundred years ago, but he was well known for being quite revolutionary in his simplistic landscapes, very atmospheric but simplistic. And it's a good exercise for you to have a go at blending acrylics and also to work tonally with just a couple of different pigments. I've used yellow ochre and burnt umber in mine, but that's it. So, you know, you could play around with just using very simple colour palettes, which is what Valerius did. And this image here is of an orchard, and we're going to try and replicate that very simply. I've done it very simply. If you want to make it more detailed, you could do an orchard in spring or in summer with fruit on, all that sort of thing, if this is too simple for you. But it's a real challenge to have a go at creating. Actually, I've just realised I didn't plug my microphone in, so I think maybe the sound might be not that great in that first minute, because I haven't got my microphone on and the sound levels might change, so apologies for that, but here we go again. Okay, so Valerius, like I said, just enjoy the simplicity of his paintings. I absolutely love them. A lot of them are quite small, but you know, you do get larger ones. If you've ever been abroad to the Netherlands or to Holland, that area, you may have already seen some. I know that they're in the collections of some of the major galleries in the UK, but have a look for them online and look at, well, as far as we can, look at them online and try and feel the textures and feel the atmosphere. And that's what we're trying to create today, but simply. All right, so the next stage you'll see is the drawing of trees. We're going to practice drawing trees, and then I'll show you how to do a blended sky and land effects, and then you'll put the trees on top. Okay, so let's have a go at drawing some trees. And we're going to draw winter trees because the landscape that we're going to do after this is going to be a sort of late winter, early spring landscape. You can still see trees. I'm looking out in my garden now and I can see that well, I've got several. I've got a walnut tree and a horse chestnut and a willow and a eucalyptus, and they're all, apart from the eucalyptus that still has foliage on from last year, amazingly, they're all still without leaf. They're starting to bud, but not quite. We're a bit behind. I noticed on Countryfile on the weekend that I think they were filming in the Cotswolds, and there were a lot more trees looking like they were about to come out into leaf. So you can look out of your windows and see these trees in the sort of skeletal form at the moment. So you could draw them from real life, it's up to you, or you can just use the images that I've sent you, or you can imagine your own trees. You know, there's lots of ways of doing this exercise. You can just make them up, which is quite a nice thing to do actually. But the thing to remember is not to get into a sort of a pattern of creating the same branches each time you do a tree. It's quite, sorry, there's a jet going on over at the moment. They've been quite prolific recently, the jets. So really looking out at your trees will help. Drawing from life, I'm a big fan of drawing from life. So, I mean, it offers the opportunity to look at things really closely and things that actually are in front of you rather than on a two-dimensional surface. You'll see more of the form you'll notice more of the details as a result of it being real. I'm just drawing one of my trees that's in my garden that I can just see at the moment, and it's a particular shape. It has sort of more of a sort of conical shape to it rather than a traditional oak shape. So that also will guide you the type of tree that you're drawing, will guide your drawing form. So yeah, just have a go at drawing a few trees and try and draw different breeds of tree. I've got a eucalyptus here, and I planted it a few years ago, and it's sort of I should have trimmed it, I think, years ago, but I didn't, and I've just let it grow, and it's got a few sort of spindly branches at the top, and then lots of foliage up here, and at the bottom it's sort of thickening up quite well, and I quite like it actually, because it gives some real height to the garden. But it's a very particular shape. It's much taller than, and has grown a lot quicker than most of the other trees in my garden. So it's been in longer than, for example, the walnut, which is much shorter. It's much older, but it's much shorter. It grows slower. Still haven't had any walnuts off of it. And this eucalyptus currently has got foliage. It's got a lot of sort of fine branches at the top, like this, with fine projections coming off of it, and that's where the majority of the foliage is. But because we're going to be doing trees without foliage, probably best just to leave it leafless, but just enjoy the shape of it. So if you have got trees in your garden that have leaves on them already, just imagine them without the leaves. So if you had an oak, then the oak tends to spread much wider than most trees, and there is a real pleasure to be gained from drawing trees. I really enjoy drawing trees because they sort of, the rhythm that you get into drawing all these branches is quite sort of hypnotic at times. But like I said, the most important thing is to make sure that you don't end up with these trees that look a bit like sort of children's drawings by drawing a circle and putting the branches into it. It's quite easy to draw these sort of uniform shapes, but they're not actually that natural. So this is how it's so different, the oak, because you do have this sort of lollipop shape, but you need to create it with your branches. So just imagine where you've got to. It depends if you're drawing the real thing, like, but if you haven't got the real thing in front of you, you have to sort of imagine where the edges stop, so that you do create this sort of oval lollipop type shape. Make sure those branches get thinner as they go towards the end. Now when we come to paint them, we'll have a different job, because you won't have a fine brush like you've got a fine pencil. By the way, I'm using cartridge paper and an HB pencil here. So a nice soft pencil to draw with will give you nice lines, not where you don't have to press too hard on the paper and things like that. So have a go, look up, I'll send you some images, but look up different shaped trees, look how the form dictates the final shape of the tree when it's in leaf, and also how they fight for space. Different trees have grown different shapes in order to get to the light. The eucalyptus particularly is very, very tall, and the leaves are very, very thin, and it shoots up and above all the other trees. And you know, I've got an apple tree here which is very short, and has this round shape very much similar to the oak. And then the walnut is tall, but the branches are almost white, because that's the other thing as well. The eucalyptus is almost purple in tone. I've got a silver birch which has white bark. So those are the other things that you could put on as details onto your trees, onto the trunks, are the colours and the textures on the bark. Go and look at some trees, it's so lovely. And if you've got a moment, give one a hug, make yourself feel better. Okay, so that's just simple drawing, and we're only going to draw outlines, because when we come to do our painting, we're going to do a simple sky and a simple stretch of land, and then we're going to put our trees on top of it. We're going to paint the sky and the land first, and then we're going to draw. Once the acrylic has dried, we will draw these trees on top, and we'll need a very nice fine brush to paint them with, because we need to get these really lovely fine edges of the twigs, the branches. So we need fine brushes. So if you haven't got one, buy one online. You want a fine detail brush. If you don't want to buy one online, you can find an old brush and trim it down. The other option is to use an acrylic pen. You can get Posca pens that have very fine nibs. You might paint this trunk section, but when you come to the end of your branches where you need those really fine points, then you could use the pen. Okay, next you'll see is how to start the landscape. Okay, so I've got a piece of acrylic paper here. You can use acrylic paper, you can use oil paper, you can use watercolour paper, but you must strap it down like I've done here with masking tape so that it stays flat. Otherwise you can use canvas or canvas board, or just a piece of old card painted with white acrylic paint. Okay, so we're going to look at Valerius, we're going to be influenced by one of Valerius's landscapes, and it's a particular landscape. I've sent you a picture of it. We're not going to copy it because you're not supposed to do that, but we're going to sort of make our own version up. But it's like a little orchard. There's a brow of a hill, quite a sort of heavy sky, and I think this one is actually supposed to be snow, with a little hedge and several apple trees or something like that. Okay, so we're going to do something similar to that. On my palette I've got a paper plate, and I've got some white acrylic, some yellow ochre and some brown, and then I've got 2 pots of water, one to clean my brushes and one for mixing colour. But as I said in past tutorials, we don't use very much just switch that off. We don't use very much water in acrylic because it tends to make it behave badly. So always be careful with the amount of water you put in. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to take the white. Now, if your white is quite liquid, mine is quite liquid, you can see it's just come straight fresh out of the tube. You should be able to use it directly from the tube. Okay, I wouldn't, this is quite cheap as well, and I wouldn't necessarily add some water into that, but you know, you have to sort of decide what and how much water. But like I said, the danger with acrylic is the addition of too much water. I'm adding a little bit in, but not a lot. And we're going to use this almost like a mixer underneath our paint. So this is wetting the paper, a bit like when we do wet in wet with watercolour. So you're wetting the paper. Now this will dry really quickly. And what we want to do is we want to create a hazy effect. Now my yellow ochre is very dry because it's old. And I'm just going to take a little bit of it. Can you see how much I've got on my brush? I'm just using a square brush. And I'm just going to add it to the top section of my painting. I'm going right off the edge. And I'm going to just blend it. So you're just going left to right. And you're blending that colour in. We want it to be soft. You could probably add a little bit more if you wanted. But this will start drying out on you very quickly. So just be aware of that, okay? Right off the edge and then blend downwards. Now we need to be quick because we need to put some down the bottom. If the lighter you blend, so that means just lift your brush straight and almost don't touch the paper. The lighter you do that, the more blended it will become, okay? So we're going to do the same at the bottom, and we're going to apply some of the yellow ochre. We need to work quickly because this is drying out, but into that I'm going to put a little bit of burnt umber right off the edge of the paper again, and then blend into, you can see it's drying off on that side and it's drying off on that side. So I'm going to take some white paint that's at the top of my brush near my ferrule. This is the ferrule, and I'm just going to blend left and right, quick strokes. You need to work quickly. If you don't work quickly, this will dry out. You won't get it blended. You might want to practice this on a small piece of paper to get the technique right before you go for the main piece. Okay, I've got some dirt there. I don't know what that is. I'm just going to smooth it out. So this is dry now, almost dry. I wouldn't want to blend this anymore. So once you've finished painting, you can wipe off the excess paint off your brush onto a rag. This will stop your water from getting too dirty. But also it means that this paint is not going down the sink if it's going on the rag, which I will wash and use again. You can see how little paint I used. I used all of the white, really small amount of yellow ochre, and almost none of the brown. So be aware, don't squeeze out too much paint. This is only very minimal application. And the next thing you want to do is dry that off with a hairdryer. Okay, so I will do that and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so this is now dry. We're going to put, using a bit of this burnt umber that we've got here. This time you do need to add a little bit of paint because you need it to be fairly liquid, but not liquid enough so you can't see it. But you just need to be able to fill your brush up with paint. And in the sticky form, it's quite difficult. Just a little bit of water and that will help, okay? Now, if you're not confident with freehand drawing, you can actually draw this little hill on before you paint it, but I'm just going to paint it directly on here, okay? So I'm just going to make up a little hill. I'm not going to do it the same as Valerius's because I want it to be different. And I'm just going to put, now, if your hand is not steady enough, then please, you can rest it on the surface. Or you can use a finer brush. My brush is a bit bitty, but I don't mind it, so I'm just going to carry on using it. It doesn't matter if it gets bigger and smaller as it goes along. It kind of adds to the detail. Okay, so there's my hill. I'm going to have one little, I'm going to have, I think I might do a sort of fence. So I'm just going to take a smaller brush for this because I want it to be fine. So I've got an old, oops, let me just close that. Hopefully that didn't interfere. Okay, so I've got a fine brush. Here it is. Okay, you can see it's quite long and pointed, and it picks up the paint really well. This is an old watercolour brush which I used for mixing and is no longer good enough for watercolour. So I'm just going to use it for my acrylic painting. So I'm just going to put a fence all the way along here, and I might put a little gateway there, so you can just do a very simple fence like this, and you can put 2 lines of fence posts there if you want. You can put a gate in if you want, but keep it simple. Use your fine brushes and have the fence posts not sort of straight all the way, and it just creates a little bit of edge on the fence. And like I said, you can always put an extra line in if you wanted. I'm just going to do it in places because I want it to sort of look a bit sort of tumble down, really, like an old fence, and that's going to be my gateway. So very simple. And then we're going to dry this off again. Okay, give me 1 second to dry it off. Okay, the next stage is to draw in some trees. Now I'm going to draw them, well, I'm going to draw a few of them with my pencil. And you can make them whatever kind of tree you want to make them, really. If you want to do sort of an orchard, then you want to look at apple trees maybe that are sort of short and round. Okay, so you can draw on as much and as many trees as you want. Make sure if you do them in the distance, a little bit further away, that they're slightly smaller so you get the perspective happening. Okay, so do the trunks thinner and smaller, and it's up to you how many you do. I'm going to paint these on. I'm just going to use the same brush as I used here because it's quite fine. It comes to a fine point. So it might very well be useful for painting with. Let's have a look. Let me just do one tree, and then what I'll do is I'll put it on time lapse, and you can see the rest of it being filled out. So there we have the trunk, and you can see that the brush is fine for the trunk. But when you come to the end of the branches, what you want to do is just start lifting your brush vertically and flick. Flick. Again, if you're not confident with the mark making, have a go on a piece of paper that's separate to your image before you do it. Just have a practice. So it's just a flicking motion. You can use, if you've got an acrylic, what they call a rigger brush or a fine detail brush. You can use that instead. They have rigger brushes a lot in watercolour, but not everybody knows that they have them in acrylic brushes, and that gives you a really fine point. So again, try not to get into a rhythm and always work from the branch outwards like this, and even go over the edge with some of your branches like that. Don't work downwards because you'll get a stumpy top and that won't work very well. But like I said, if you want to, you can have a practice lifting and flicking, lifting and flicking, lifting, flick, before you do any painting on your main picture. Okay, I'm going to fill the rest in on time lapse so you can see it a little bit quicker. Okay, so there we go, a very simple orchard with a blended atmospheric sky. I'm going to take off the masking tape now, but I'm going to do it using a hairdryer because masking tape tends to tear paper, but if you warm it up before you tear it off, before you take it off, then it tends to leave the paper behind. The other thing you can do is just cut off the edges here and here, especially if you're going to frame your picture. The framer will use this section here to actually put a mount onto, and they will always thank you for that, if that's the case, for having that edge to mount onto, because they're so frustrated with painters who paint right up to the edges of their canvases and so forth, because then they have nothing to bond the mount to. That's if you put a mount on it. If you might not like mounts, but if you do, always leave this, and always, as you know, an afterthought, just leave it on anyway, because the framer can always cut it off if they need to. But for this purpose, I'm going to take it off so you can see it with a border and see the edges cleaned up. But I'm going to do it on time lapse again, mainly so that you don't have to listen to the hairdryer. So there you go, there's the finished picture. It's rather beautiful because it's quite atmospheric. It's something you might want to practice. It's something that you, well, if you like simplicity, it's a lovely thing to do. You could use different colours. You can see where the tape has torn away a little bit here. That wasn't quite hot enough when I took it off, and it's took a little tiny bits here and there on the side. But like I said, you can frame up to that, so that's not an issue. One nice thing is to try and do this in several different colours and have 3 or 4. You can do a triptych with different colours, different trees, larger trees, smaller trees, incorporate maybe a little bit of colour into the distant hill. But if you look at Valerius's paintings, you'll see they're all very, very simple. Okay, so it's about the atmosphere. He did a lot of snow paintings, and they're really, really beautiful and quite calming to look at because they don't contain too much detail. All right, hope you enjoy. Send me some pictures of your finished paintings. It would be lovely to see them. And like I said, go and have a look at Valerius's work. It is so beautiful. And a lot of the sort of copses and paintings of that subject that look and feel very similar to a lot of Welsh landscape that you see. Okay, enjoy. See you next time. Bye for now.